What's up, guys, and welcome to In Depth, the series where you send in your tattoos and I go over design, composition, and technique to give you a different perspective on how you could tackle your pieces in the future. Today's piece was sent in by Two Tatted, TWO.tatted. Shout out to you for sending in your piece. And this is what we got. This is what he sent in. He's a piece he did. It seems like a silhouette of a father and his child. Maybe a beach scene behind him, footprints, some writing here, and we got a clock on the hand with a cross. Okay, so already I'd like to say that I really like how you're trying new stuff. You're really trying to do something different with the composition. I see you're trying to go onto the finger with the cross. You have the clock, you tried to fit the whole circle onto the hand, and then you kind of got a decent layout here. Right off the bat, I would say compositionally, there is some cool things that you could have done. I'm not saying what you did was wrong, but maybe just some way that you could set yourself up for success, you know? So initially, I think it's cool that you're trying something new with this cross on the finger. I get what you're going for. Trust me, I get what you're going for. The only thing I would say is it gets a little tough, right? When you're trying to get something negative that goes across the bend of the knuckle, and then you're trying to black out the background. So this is obviously gonna be a tough heel. It doesn't matter who does it, it's gonna be a tough heel. There's parts in this bend area that are gonna fall out, and then I could even tell by zooming into it that the line that you came off of, it's a little bit choppy. So any choppiness that I can see when it's fresh is definitely gonna stand out when it's healed. I would suggest maybe not taking away from your idea, because you could actually still do this, but I think you could have gotten the same effect if you were to cut it short, maybe just above the knuckle, because I feel like it's still substantial size cross for you to go ahead and do it just to here, you know? That way you don't have to deal with the bend of the knuckle, and then deal with also the client having to, let's say he had something on or whatever, and he's just always gonna have this part sticking out on his finger. It's a little too far for me, especially since you can't tell what it is if you are just looking at his finger. So it makes it a little random. What I would say is you keep it above the knuckle so you can keep the same look, but also what I would say, let me go ahead and take my ring off here. What I would say is maybe you can make this an even more interesting cross, because the way you did it, it almost looks like a ribbon, the way you ended it off with these little V shapes right here, you know? So it almost looks like a ribbon, not to mention the way you have it flowing down the thing. It's not necessarily straight depending on how he holds his hand. So it definitely gives off that like choppy ribbon vibe, okay? And across, you want it to feel solid and straight, and yeah, so I would suggest that maybe to replace this with a cross that maybe has a little more intricacy to the ends. So maybe, you know, I'm just doing this really fast, but maybe one of those crosses that just has a better ending to these tips, you know? That way you could add a little more flair to them, you know? And then at the bottom, you could just go down, and then maybe you could end it about here. Now I'm just sketching this in here really quickly, but I think that if you were to make this a more interesting cross, it would stand out a lot more. And already it looks like a better cross than having it go all the way down the stretch of the finger, okay? Another thing too is, I see you trying to fit this whole circle, which is supposed to be a perfect circle, on a hand that is not perfectly flat. And that's a tough one, man. I mean, even to the best artists, it's gonna be really tough to do that. But what you can do is make decisions that set yourself up for success. So what I would say is playing around with the composition of a clock is really fun. You don't always have to do the full circle all the way around clock to get the clock effect. Might I suggest maybe you could have zoomed in on the clock a little bit, maybe this part of the clock, and then you could have just had it poking out of the hand from the side, like so, something like this, you know? I'm just kind of like sketching it in there or whatever, but it would be really cool if maybe it was something like that. And then you would have like the hands coming out whichever way you wanted them to come out. Let me get that second layer to the clock here, boom. So now what you have is you have kind of a half circle or just a portion of the circle. It's kind of coming out from the side of the hand, and this would be the edge of the clock, and then your Roman numerals would go here. And then what you could even do is take one of the Roman numerals and make them bigger than the others. You know, let's say it was an X over here, and then the rest was like 1, X, and then it goes X, fucking whatever the Roman numerals are. But that way you could play around with maybe even having a negative Roman numeral here and the rest of them being black, or you can make this black and the rest of them black as well. But it would be cool to blow one up just to have a more dynamic look to it all. You could do the hands out going like this. So already what you're doing is playing around with a more unique composition, especially with this going onto the finger and then this coming out from the side instead of fitting the perfect circle on the top of the hand. Just setting yourself up for success, that's all it is. And then with these leaves, I see what you're going for. I really like them. Maybe a way to make it look a little more organic too, you know, I know you're going for a graphic look, but some of these being a little different could help a lot with the organic look of things. Again, I'm just like scribbling this in there, but there's definitely a way to make it a little less, let's say cartoony, and maybe a little more realistic by the way that the leaves come out from the center or whatever. I do like the angle you have it at. You could have angled it a tiny bit more just to go with the upward flow of the wrist. And I think that would help a lot with the flow of the composition. Silhouette, I have no problem with it, where it's sitting, it coming out from behind the leaves. I think that's pretty cool. I think what you got going here is you have a coastline. You kind of have a horizon line in the background. This is the water, and then I'm assuming this is the clouds in the sky, but for some reason you stop them here, and then you have the moon, sun, moon, whatever. You have the sun or moon up here with no clouds around it. So it's almost like you decided to stop the clouds here, even though you have the moon way up here, which is a little too much dead space for me, I would say. So if I suggest, I like where you have the horizon line, and that looks really good the way you shaded it. But maybe I would bring the moon down, and maybe it would probably, for me, if I was doing it, would be sitting partially behind the baby, right? Okay, so if you were to shade off of this moon and maybe there was some clouds around it and stuff, the highlighted part would be part of the baby. So it kind of would give it a focal point a little bit. It would make it stand out, because if the moon is negative, then this solid black in front of the negative is really going to stand out. And then you could just not worry too much about just shading close to the man, the silhouette of the man a little bit, get a little closer to it, make it glow a little bit, and then the baby's head or the upper part of the body would stand out a lot sitting in front of that negative shape. Now we're already changing the composition. Now, as you can see, we're kind of bringing it in a little more, so there's not as much dead space. So a lot of this is just kind of shrinking this way, right? That's what we did down here. We brought it up, and then down here we brought it down. So now everything you have is just a little more condensed, which gives us more room to play around with, right? So now you have these footprints up here. And I don't mind where they're placed, but now that we shrunk the composition a bit, I think there's room to adjust where everything sits at. You know, you have your palm trees coming out, which I don't mind where they're sitting at all, but maybe we just adjusted a tad bit for where we adjusted everything else. Just sketching, guys. Don't worry about it. This is a beautiful drawing. I know. This is so great how I'm doing it. But, you know, I do like how you have some of these leaves that overlap the negative shape, which helps a lot. But maybe considering we have the baby partially in here, you only need a piece of this palm tree going in front, just a tiny bit, because you don't want to like overdo what's in front of this, and you don't want to clutter it too much, right? But I would say it would be really cool if the tip of this palm leaf were to touch in front of the negative and then kind of get close to the baby's head. So now we have all of this room to play with. Now we could adjust where the footprints are. I'd say that staggering the footprints was a good idea. We don't want them just perfectly next to each other, but in this situation, we might be able to stagger them a little more. So instead of having one here, maybe we have one here because we have the room to do it, and then you put one maybe a little higher up here. So now what you have is it's even more staggered. It's even more placed in a way that creates flow. It creates an angle, right? You already were doing that, but it gives us a chance to really solidify it, because now we're working with our angles, which when I talk about composition with people, I like to, I know a lot of people like the S curve and the C curve idea, but I also mess with angles. So I'm thinking a lot about this, okay? which this is the same reason why we would put the clock coming out from this side and not this side, because it just wouldn't make sense. The angle of the arm moving towards the thumb is going to help you a lot as a rule of thumb, no pun intended, coming out from the correct angle. So we're always going to be working from here when it comes to the bottom forearm, okay? Now, with that being said, remember the angles, right? So now that you have these words right here, and I know they're kind of haphazardly put in there, to be honest. You kind of just put them in a place where you had some room and then picked the random font, or maybe you freehanded it, I don't know, just because it's like a small part of the piece. But really, this could be incorporated into the composition in a way that it doesn't feel like it's alone, right? So what we could do is write this out a little differently, but we're gonna write this at an angle, right? In a font that I would say, if I had to suggest, in a handwriting font, so it looks like somebody wrote it on a notepad. And I think that would help a lot to give the authenticity of what you're trying to get across here. So like you would have it maybe the similar size, maybe a little bigger, but it would be coming downward at an angle like such. And mind you, I'm just scribbling these words in here just so you can get an idea of the angle that I'm going for. So now what you're doing is you're complementing the angle of where we placed the footprints with the angle that you laid the words at, and then you have the leaves coming up. And that's why I told you to, maybe we could tilt these leaves up a little more, because what you're doing now is contrasting your angles. So all the main stuff is coming at the correct angle, and then every once in a while you have something that cuts into it and contrasts the angles, okay? And this is all basically like, the way I see it, it's kind of like feng shui with interior design. When you step back and someone looks at it, they're gonna look at it and see that there's something off or there's something on perfectly. They just can't point out what it is. And usually it has something to do with proportions, angles, stuff like that. But when you hit it right and someone looks at it, there's gonna be a harmony to your piece that allows it to be undeniably good, no matter who looks at it. No one's gonna look at it and be like, oh, you know what, it feels like something's off. No, everyone's gonna look at it and feel like it's on point, because for some reason you figured out the exact composition, the right proportions, the right angles to put everything, and it all looks like it just kind of flows together naturally, right? And that's what we're aiming for with every piece we do. So far, I mean, I know it looks like I changed a lot, but you have all the tools here. You have all the things that you need here. I think that just where you're placing and the sizing of everything just needs to be adjusted a tad bit. I would love to have seen you come above the knuckle. Just to recap, above the knuckle with the cross, giving the ends a little bit more character. And this is just a quick thing, but there's plenty of crosses that you can take reference from that have a lot more character to them. I'd say zooming in on the clock is actually one of my favorite adjustments of this, because this perfect circle is never gonna sit flat on someone's hand. I don't care what size you make it. I understand you were trying to make it a size that maybe it could, but he's gonna move his hands all the time. When he's showing people, it's never gonna be flat. It's just not gonna happen, right? So I think zooming in on the clock and getting just a portion of it coming out from the side of his hand is awesome. Then you could play around with the hands coming out. Let me switch to a different color so you guys can see what I'm doing. Maybe the hands are coming out past the edge, because this doesn't have to be a perfect clock the way you know a clock to be. You can deconstruct the clock and use the elements of it so that you could add some more character, you know? You could even take a piece out of this clock, like a little triangle, right? Boom, like it's broken, right? So we're taking that, and then the triangle could land off to the side over here, as if it was lifted up off of the clock and then placed over here. The clock is breaking, there's pieces being flung around and stuff, right? That's also the same idea when I talk about using the Roman numerals to sit where you want them to sit. If there's an X right here, instead of putting it inside the clock all nice and neatly, maybe it overlaps the edge of the clock and it's taking up the whole, this little part of the hand right here, you know what I mean? So it gives you something to fill this gap right here. And then you could also have the hands breaking the barrier of the clock right here, and you could place them wherever you want. Just get loose with it, as long as you're using the correct pieces that are already incorporated into the clock and you're keeping your angles and proportions in mind. Dude, you can go crazy. You can mess around with a lot of things and have fun with it. We're changing the angle of the leaves so that it has a more contrasting angle to what you already have. Because you have it at an angle, but it's subtle. And I think that exaggerating that a little bit more is gonna help with the composition. So let's exaggerate that angle a little more and curve it up a little more. We're gonna keep the silhouette around where it's at, keep the horizon line generally where it's at. We're gonna move the moon behind the baby so it has a focal point, using the moon as kind of a way to highlight something that you wanna highlight that's important, right? So now we got the moon in front behind the baby. We're changing the palm trees a little bit. It's overlapping the negative shape of the moon just a tad bit, but generally they're in the same spot. We're just kind of condensing them from where they were at, right? And now we have room to, now that I think about it, we should even make these footprints a little bigger because we have the room to do it. So we might even go yay big with the footprints, right? Boom. Now what we have is it's taking up that space. It doesn't look like an accessory. It looks like a part of the piece in a main way, okay? So now we got these big, and then whatever space we have left, we're gonna put our wording at an angle, okay? Remember, we're talking about angles. Everything putting at the right angle is gonna be crucial. It'll also be really cool if you put these feet prints and you actually turn the toes slightly this way so they still go with this angle. So they're tilting a little bit, and then we're gonna contrast that tilt that way with the words coming down this way, okay? Now I know this looks like a bunch of scribbles, but hopefully you guys get the idea. I feel like there's a lot of great points to make in this one. That's why I chose it and reviewed this one. But I hope you could take something from this and hear what I'm talking about, because if you were to adjust this piece just a little bit, it could have been even better than it is now. And I'd say your application is pretty good. Now you're just gonna need to mess around with your designing and stuff. So I hope you took a couple things that I said and add it into your next tattoo. This one was really fun to review. It was really fun to go through the composition. Composition is personally my favorite. And yeah, man, good job, Two Tatted. Shout out to Two Tatted. You guys follow him on Instagram. We'll put his @ link in the description or in the video right here. Thank you guys for another video. I'm excited to do another one. These have really been fun. And I'll see you in the next video.